She mocked my fear, but my courage exposed his true face. The morning air was cool as Emily stepped out of her small apartment, clutching a worn-out backpack and a cup of coffee. At just 24 years old, she carried responsibilities far beyond her age. Her father had been unable to work for months due to a serious illness, and her younger brother was still in school. Every paycheck she earned kept the family afloat. She worked as a customer service representative in a downtown office. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Every weekday, she followed the same route, walking 10 minutes to the bus stop before catching the 8 a.m. bus. For years, it had been an ordinary routine, until one man changed everything. His name was Ryan. Ryan spent most mornings outside a convenience store with a group of friends. At first, Emily ignored the whistles and sarcastic comments. She believed that if she didn't react, they would eventually lose interest. Instead, they became bolder. Each day, Ryan found a new way to make her uncomfortable. Smile a little. Why are you always so serious? Don't act like you're too good for everyone. Emily kept walking. She never answered. She never looked back. But inside, she dreaded every morning. One Monday, as she approached the crosswalk, Ryan suddenly stepped directly into her path. "Where's the hurry?" he asked with a grin. Emily took a step to the side. "So you're not even going to say hello?" "I need to get to work," she replied calmly. Ryan laughed loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear him. His friends joined in. People walking past glanced over for a second before continuing on, pretending nothing had happened. Emily finally slipped past him and hurried toward the bus stop. She reached work on time, but she couldn't concentrate. The humiliation stayed with her all day. That evening, sitting beside her father's hospital bed, she remained unusually quiet. Her father noticed. "Something happened today, didn't it?" Emily forced a smile. "No, I'm just tired." She didn't want him to worry. That night, she stared at the ceiling for hours. She realized something important. Silence wasn't solving the problem. It was encouraging it. She didn't want revenge fueled by anger. She wanted accountability. She wanted proof. And she wanted to make sure Ryan could never intimidate another woman again. The next morning, before leaving home, Emily quietly activated the video recorder on her phone. She slipped it into her jacket pocket. This time, she was ready. The next morning, Emily left home 15 minutes earlier than usual. Before locking the front door, she checked her phone one last time. The battery was full, the storage had plenty of space, and the camera was already recording from inside her jacket pocket. She took a deep breath. "This ends now," she whispered. As she walked toward the bus stop, her heart raced faster with every step. She wasn't afraid of Ryan anymore. She was afraid that no one would believe her if she failed to gather enough evidence. The familiar convenience store appeared in the distance. Ryan and his friends were already there, leaning against the wall, laughing, watching everyone who passed. Ryan noticed Emily immediately. "Well, look who is here," he called out. His friends chuckled. Emily kept walking without saying a word. Ryan stepped closer. "So, still pretending we're invisible?" No response. He circled around and blocked the sidewalk. "Come on, just smile." Emily calmly looked him in the eye. "Please move." Instead of moving, Ryan laughed even louder. "You actually think you're important?" His friends burst into laughter. Everything was being recorded. Every word, every insult, every second. Emily quietly walked around him and continued toward the bus stop. She didn't argue. She didn't react. That afternoon, after work, she watched the recording. The video was clear. Ryan's face, his voice, his friends, everything. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a small sense of relief. But she knew one recording wouldn't be enough. Over the next several days, she continued documenting every encounter. Sometimes Ryan shouted comments from across the street. Sometimes he deliberately walked beside her. Sometimes he tried to embarrass her in front of strangers. Each incident was recorded. One evening, Emily organized every video into separate folders. She wrote down dates, times, and locations in a notebook. She wanted every detail to be accurate. A few days later, something unexpected happened. At work, her coworker Sarah noticed Emily looking exhausted. "You've been distracted all week," Sarah said gently. "Is everything okay?" Emily hesitated. For a moment, she considered saying nothing. Then she remembered how staying silent had only made things worse. She told Sarah everything. The repeated harassment, the fear, the recordings. Sarah listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've done the right thing." Emily looked uncertain. "What if nobody believes me?" Sarah smiled. "They will when they see the truth." Those words gave Emily hope. She finally realized she didn't have to face this alone. But across town, Ryan remained completely unaware. He still believed Emily was too frightened to speak. He had no idea that every careless word he had spoken was becoming evidence. And very soon, his confidence would become his biggest mistake. Emily barely slept that night. The videos on her phone were no longer just recordings. They were proof that what had been happening wasn't just jokes or harmless teasing. It was a pattern. The next morning, Sarah walked into the office carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I've been thinking," she said, handing one to Emily. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." Emily looked down. "I know. I just don't know where to start." Sarah smiled reassuringly. "Let's start with someone who can help." After work, the two of them visited a local community support center that assisted people dealing with harassment and intimidation. A counselor listened carefully as Emily explained everything from the beginning. She watched several of the recordings without interrupting. When the final video ended, she looked at Emily and said quietly, "You've done exactly the right thing by documenting these incidents. What you're describing is a repeated pattern of harassment, and you have evidence." For the first time in weeks, Emily felt heard. The counselor explained her options, including how to make a formal report and preserve the evidence properly. She also encouraged Emily not to walk the route alone whenever possible while the situation was being addressed. Emily left the office feeling stronger than when she had entered. The following morning, Ryan was waiting in the same place. Nothing had changed. At least, that's what he believed. "There she is," he shouted with a smug grin. Emily ignored him and continued walking. Ryan moved closer. "What? No attitude today." Before he could say anything else, an older woman standing nearby turned toward him. "Young man," she said firmly, "I've seen this happen more than once. Leave her alone." Ryan looked surprised. His friends laughed awkwardly. "It's none of your business," Ryan replied. The woman didn't back down. "It becomes everyone's business when someone is being treated like this." Ryan rolled his eyes and walked away, pretending not to care. But for the first time, someone else had spoken up. Emily thanked the woman before boarding her bus. That small act of courage meant more than words could express. Later that afternoon, Emily received a message from Sarah. "You're not alone anymore." Emily smiled. She realized courage could spread from one person to another. Meanwhile, Ryan sat at the convenience store bragging to his friends. "She's too scared to do anything." His friends nodded. None of them knew that witnesses were beginning to notice. People who had once looked away were starting to pay attention. And every new witness made Emily's case stronger. Ryan still believed he was untouchable. He had no idea that the truth was quietly closing in around him. Emily woke up earlier than usual. Today wasn't just another workday. It was the day she had decided to take the next step. She carefully copied every video, photo, and written note onto a secure drive. Sarah had helped her organize everything in chronological order, dates, times, locations, and short descriptions of each incident. There were now more than 20 recordings. Looking at the folder made Emily realize something. This hadn't happened once. It had happened over and over again. After work, Emily visited the local police station. Her hands trembled as she walked through the front door. A police officer greeted her politely. "How can I help you today?" Emily swallowed hard. "I'd like to report repeated harassment." She explained everything from the very beginning. The officer listened carefully without interrupting. When Emily handed over the recordings, the officer watched several clips in silence. Each video showed the same pattern. Ryan blocking her path, making unwanted comments, refusing to leave her alone. The officer nodded. "You've done the right thing by documenting everything. We'll review this evidence and begin the proper process." Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. 4 weeks, she had carried the burden alone. Now, someone was finally taking it seriously. The next morning, Emily changed her routine slightly. She walked with Sarah to the bus stop. Ryan noticed immediately. So now you need a bodyguard, he joked loudly. Sarah looked directly at him. No. She just deserves to get to work in peace. Ryan smirked but said nothing else. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. His friends exchanged nervous glances. The laughter wasn't as loud as before. People standing nearby were watching. An elderly man quietly shook his head. A college student took out her phone. Ryan suddenly realized people weren't ignoring him anymore. Later that week, the officer contacted Emily. We've reviewed your evidence, he said. There are also security cameras from nearby businesses that may support your report. Emily was surprised. She hadn't even thought about surveillance cameras. The convenience store, the pharmacy, the bank across the street. Each building had cameras facing the sidewalk. If the footage matched her recordings, the case would become even stronger. Meanwhile, Ryan continued acting as though nothing had changed. He laughed with his friends. He mocked Emily whenever she passed. But confidence had slowly turned into anxiety. He noticed strangers looking at him differently. He noticed people whispering. He noticed that some of his own friends were becoming uncomfortable. One afternoon, one of them quietly said, "Maybe we should stop hanging around here." Ryan frowned. "What are you scared of?" His friend didn't answer. Deep down, he already knew things were starting to fall apart. Ryan simply refused to believe it. What he didn't know was that every passing day brought more evidence, and less time before he would have to face the consequences of his own actions. 3 days passed without any major incident. Emily continued her routine, but something had changed. She no longer walked with her head down. She wasn't fearless, but she wasn't alone anymore. Sarah walked beside her whenever their schedules matched, and several regular commuters had started recognizing Emily. Some would simply smile, while others would quietly ask if she was doing okay. Those small gestures gave her strength. Meanwhile, Ryan noticed the difference. "Why is everyone staring at me?" he muttered to one of his friends. "They're probably not," his friend replied. But they were. Word had slowly begun to spread through the neighborhood. Not rumors. Facts. People had seen enough to realize that Emily hadn't been imagining anything. A few days later, Emily received another call from the investigating officer. "Miss Carter," he said, "we've collected footage from nearby security cameras." Emily held her breath. "Does it help?" "It supports several of the incidents shown in your recordings." For a moment, Emily closed her eyes. She finally felt that the truth was becoming impossible to deny. The officer also explained that they had spoken with a few people who regularly used the same bus stop. Some had agreed to provide witness statements after seeing the videos. Every new piece of evidence strengthened the case. Ryan, however, still believed everything would blow over. "This is ridiculous," he laughed. "No one's going to do anything." But his confidence began to crack when one of his closest friends stopped showing up. Later that afternoon, Ryan called him. "Where have you been?" "I don't think I want to be part of this anymore," his friend admitted. "What are you talking about?" "I watched one of the videos." Ryan fell silent. His friend continued, "It wasn't funny, Ryan. You kept following her even after she told you to leave her alone. You crossed the line." The call ended. For the first time, Ryan felt completely alone. That evening, Emily sat with her father on the front porch. He looked healthier than he had in weeks. "I can see something has changed," he said. Emily smiled softly. "I finally decided to stop hiding." Her father nodded with pride. Standing up for yourself isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the same thing doesn't happen again. Those words stayed with Emily. She realized this journey had never been about humiliating Ryan. It was about protecting herself, and perhaps protecting someone she would never even meet. Because if she stayed silent, another woman might face the same fear tomorrow. Across town, Ryan walked past the convenience store alone. The place that once felt like his stage now felt different. People weren't laughing with him anymore. Some looked away. Others stared. Even the store owner seemed uncomfortable. Ryan had spent weeks believing he was in control. Now, for the first time, he wondered whether everything he had built on arrogance was about to collapse. And he had no idea that an official meeting had already been scheduled. A meeting that would change his life forever. Monday morning arrived with an unusual silence. Emily stood at the kitchen window, holding a warm cup of coffee. The sunrise painted the streets in soft shades of gold, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Her phone buzzed. It was the investigating officer. "Good morning, Miss Carter." "Good morning. I wanted to let you know we've completed the initial review of the evidence. We've also interviewed several witnesses. We'd like you to come in this afternoon to review the next steps." Emily took a deep breath. "Thank you. I'll be there." After ending the call, she looked at herself in the mirror. A few weeks earlier, she had seen someone frightened and exhausted. Today, she saw someone stronger, not because the fear had disappeared, but because she had refused to let it control her. Ryan had no idea what was happening. As usual, he stood outside the convenience store with two friends. But something felt different. People weren't smiling at him anymore. Even his friends seemed distracted. One of them checked his phone and quietly stepped aside. "I've got to go." So suddenly, Ryan asked, "I just have things to do." Within minutes, Ryan found himself standing alone. For the first time in months, the sidewalk felt strangely empty. That afternoon, Emily arrived at the police station. The officer welcomed her into a meeting room. A folder lay on the table. Inside were printed screenshots from the security cameras, copies of witness statements, and transcripts summarizing key moments from her recordings. The officer spoke calmly. "The evidence shows a repeated pattern of unwanted behavior over several weeks. Based on the information we've gathered, we're moving forward with the appropriate legal process." Emily listened quietly. She had imagined this moment many times, yet hearing those words still felt unreal. The officer continued, "You showed patience, collected evidence carefully, and reported the situation through the proper channels. That made a significant difference." Emily nodded. "I just wanted it to stop." "And now," the officer replied, "you're helping make sure it does." Later that evening, Ryan received an official phone call requesting that he appear for an interview regarding a complaint. His smile disappeared. "What complaint?" "We'll discuss the details when you arrive." The call ended. Ryan stared at his phone. For the first time, he realized this wasn't a joke. This wasn't gossip. This was real. He immediately called several friends. Most didn't answer. One finally picked up. "I can't help you," his friend said quietly. "Why not?" "Because what happened was wrong." The line went silent. Ryan slowly lowered his phone. The confidence that had once defined him was fading. In its place came uncertainty. That night, Emily sat outside her home with her father. The cool evening breeze carried a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. Her father smiled gently. "No matter what happens next, I'm proud of you." Emily looked up at the stars. "I kept thinking I was powerless." He shook his head. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to do the right thing despite it." Emily smiled. She finally believed those words. But the journey wasn't over. Tomorrow, Ryan would have to answer difficult questions. And for the first time, he would come face to face with the consequences of his own choices. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the police station earlier than the time he had been given. For the first time in years, he looked nervous. His hands were in his pockets, and his confident smile was gone. He kept telling himself the same thing. This is all just a misunderstanding. An officer escorted him into a small interview room. A file was already waiting on the table. Ryan sat down. The officer opened the folder. "We're here to discuss a complaint involving repeated harassment." Ryan forced a laugh. "Harassment? I was only joking." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he placed a printed photograph on the table. It was a clear image from a security camera. Ryan standing directly in Emily's path. The officer placed another photo beside it, then another, and another. Each one had a different date. Each one showed the same behavior. Ryan's smile slowly disappeared. A few moments later, the officer played one of Emily's recordings. Ryan heard his own voice filling the room. The comments, the laughter, the insults. There was no denying it. He lowered his eyes. The silence felt heavier than any words. "You recognize your voice?" the officer asked calmly. Ryan nodded. "Yes." "Were those comments welcome?" Ryan didn't answer. The question echoed in his mind. For the first time, he couldn't think of an excuse. Meanwhile, Emily was back at work. She tried to focus on her computer, but her thoughts kept drifting. Sarah walked over. "Whatever happens today?" she said. "Remember something." Emily looked up. "You already won." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "You found your voice." Sarah smiled. "Nobody can take that away from you." Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes. Weeks ago, she had been terrified to walk to work. Now she was sitting in her office, surrounded by people who believed her. That alone felt like a victory. Back at the station, Ryan's interview continued. The officer explained that multiple witnesses had confirmed seeing similar incidents over several weeks. Security footage supported Emily's recordings. The evidence painted one clear picture. This wasn't one isolated moment. It was repeated behavior. Ryan quietly asked, "What happens now?" The officer replied, "The legal process will continue. You'll be informed of the next steps according to the law." Ryan nodded silently. For the first time, he understood something he had never considered before. Small actions, repeated over time, can have serious consequences. That evening, Ryan walked past the convenience store alone. The place that once echoed with laughter now felt strangely quiet. He noticed the empty sidewalk. He noticed people avoiding eye contact. He realized something painful. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. And once it's lost, it can take years to rebuild. Across town, Emily stood on her apartment balcony, watching the sunset. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the officer. "Thank you for your cooperation. We'll keep you informed as the process continues." Emily smiled softly. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't seeking revenge. She simply felt relieved. Relieved that she had chosen courage over silence. But one final chapter still remained. The chapter where everyone would learn that respect is stronger than fear. And that one person's courage can inspire an entire community. A week passed. For the first time in months, Emily walked to work without constantly looking over her shoulder. The familiar streets hadn't changed. The bus stop was still there. The convenience store was still on the corner. But something felt different. The fear that had once followed her every morning had slowly disappeared. She finally felt free. At work, Emily received an unexpected email from the Human Resources Department. The subject line read, "Community Safety Awareness Program." The company had learned that one of its employees had shown remarkable courage by reporting repeated harassment through the proper channels. Without mentioning names, they wanted to organize a workplace seminar about personal safety, respect, and how to support people facing harassment. Emily read the message twice. She never imagined that her experience could help others. Later that afternoon, Emily met with the community counselor again. "You look different," the counselor said with a smile. "I feel different," Emily replied. The counselor nodded. "What changed?" Emily thought for a moment. "I stopped waiting for someone else to save me. I asked for help, and I realized asking for help isn't weakness. It's strength." The counselor smiled proudly. "Exactly." Meanwhile, Ryan's life had become very quiet. He no longer spent time outside the convenience store. Most of his old friends had distanced themselves. Some were disappointed. Others simply didn't want to be associated with what had happened. Ryan spent long evenings thinking about everything. For the first time, he replayed the recordings in his own mind. Not as jokes, not as harmless comments, but from Emily's perspective. He finally understood something he had ignored for years. What seemed insignificant to him had caused someone else weeks of fear and anxiety. That realization hurt more than he expected. Several days later, Emily received another call from the investigating officer. "I wanted to update you," he said. "The case is continuing through the appropriate legal process. We also wanted to thank you for your patience and cooperation." Emily thanked him. Before ending the call, the officer added one more sentence. "Your willingness to come forward encouraged another person to report a similar experience." Emily froze. "Someone else?" "Yes. They said your courage gave them the confidence to speak." Emily slowly smiled. She realized this had become bigger than her own story. That evening, Emily stood outside the community center after speaking at a small safety awareness event. She wasn't a professional speaker. She didn't have perfect words. She simply told the truth. She spoke about fear. She spoke about silence. She spoke about courage. When she finished, the audience applauded. A young college student approached her afterward. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "I've been dealing with something similar. I thought nobody would believe me." Emily gently smiled. "They will. But don't face it alone." The student nodded with tears in her eyes. As Emily walked home beneath the evening sky, she realized something important. Justice wasn't only about consequences. It was also about creating change, and change had already begun. But one final chapter remained, a chapter that would reveal how a single act of courage transformed not only Emily's life, but the entire community around her. 2 months had passed. Life was slowly returning to normal. Emily no longer woke up with anxiety every morning. She walked to work with confidence, greeted the people at the bus stop, and even smiled more often. The same road that once reminded her of fear had become a symbol of her strength. One afternoon, Emily received another call from the investigating officer. "Miss Carter," he said, "I wanted to let you know that the case has reached its final stage. You'll receive official confirmation soon." Emily thanked him. She wasn't excited. She wasn't angry. She simply felt peaceful. She had done everything she could. The rest was now in the hands of the legal process. Across town, Ryan sat alone in a small park. The last few weeks had forced him to face the consequences of his actions. He had lost the trust of many friends. His reputation had suffered. Most importantly, he had been forced to confront the truth about his own behavior. For a long time, he blamed everyone else. But eventually, he stopped making excuses. He realized that respect is not earned by making others feel small. It is earned by treating them with dignity. One evening, while walking home, Ryan noticed a group of teenagers laughing loudly at a young woman waiting at a bus stop. One of them stepped into her path. For a brief moment, Ryan saw his own past reflected in them. Without thinking, he walked over. "Leave her alone," he said firmly. The teenagers looked surprised. One of them laughed. "What does it matter to you?" Ryan answered quietly, "Because I know where this kind of behavior leads." After a few tense seconds, the teenagers shrugged and walked away. The young woman thanked him before leaving. Ryan stood there silently. He wasn't trying to erase the past. He knew he couldn't, but he had finally understood that every person has a choice. To make someone's day worse, or to make it safer. The following week, Emily was invited to speak at another community event. This time, the room was full. Students, parents, teachers, local business owners. She stood behind the podium, looked around the room, and smiled. "I used to believe that staying silent would protect me," she began. But silence only protected the problem. The room became completely quiet. "I learned that courage doesn't always look loud. Sometimes courage is simply taking the first step, asking for help, and refusing to accept disrespect as normal." When she finished speaking, the audience stood and applauded. Emily looked around the room. She realized something incredible. This was no longer just her story. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt afraid to speak. As Emily left the community center, Sarah caught up with her. "Remember when you told me no one would believe you?" Sarah asked with a smile. Emily laughed softly. "I remember." Sarah looked at her proudly. "Now look how many people believe in you." Emily looked toward the sunset. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't defeating someone else. It's helping others find the courage to stand up for themselves. Only one chapter remained. The final chapter. The chapter where every loose end would come together, and where one simple decision would leave a lasting impact on an entire community. 6 months later, spring had returned to the city. The trees lining the streets were covered in fresh green leaves, and the same sidewalk that had once filled Emily with fear now reminded her of how far she had come. Every morning, she still walked to work. But this time, her head was held high. She no longer looked over her shoulder. She no longer felt trapped. She had reclaimed her life. One afternoon, Emily received a letter confirming that the legal process had concluded. The repeated harassment had been formally addressed through the appropriate legal system based on the evidence and witness statements. She quietly folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't something she wanted to celebrate. It was simply the end of a difficult chapter. She whispered to herself, "Justice isn't about winning. It's about making sure what's wrong finally stops." That evening, Emily met Sarah at their favorite coffee shop. Sarah smiled. "So how does it feel?" Emily looked out the window for a moment. "I thought I wanted revenge." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And now?" Emily smiled gently. "I wanted revenge because I was hurt, but what I really needed was peace." Sarah nodded. "I think you found it." Across town, Ryan had changed too. He had completed the counseling and educational program that had been recommended as part of addressing his behavior. He had found a new job in another part of the city. He spoke less. He listened more. He understood that respect is earned through actions, not words. The past would always be part of his life, but he now had a choice about the future, to repeat his mistakes, or to become someone better. He chose the second path. Several weeks later, Emily was invited to speak at a citywide community event about courage and standing up against harassment. As she stepped onto the stage, hundreds of people filled the hall. She wasn't famous. She wasn't a celebrity. She was simply someone who had refused to remain silent. Emily looked around the room and began. There was a time when I believed I was powerless. Every morning, I walked with fear. Every night, I wondered if tomorrow would be worse. But one decision changed everything. I stopped asking, why is this happening to me? And I started asking, what can I do to change it? That question changed my life. The audience listened in complete silence. She continued, if you're afraid, please know this. You are not alone. Speaking up is not weakness. Asking for help is not shame. And respecting others is a responsibility we all share. Real courage begins the moment you refuse to accept disrespect as normal. When she finished speaking, the audience rose to their feet. A long standing ovation filled the hall. Emily smiled, not because she had defeated someone, but because she had discovered her own strength. As the sun set over the city, Emily walked home along the same road where her journey had begun. The convenience store was still there. The bus stop was still there. The street looked exactly the same. But she had changed. She paused for a moment, looked toward the evening sky and smiled. Some battles are not won through anger. Some victories are not measured by revenge. The greatest victory is refusing to let fear decide who you become. And sometimes, the strongest revenge of all is living your life with courage, dignity, and peace. The end.